I remember the lights more than anything else because they were warm and golden, hanging above us like tiny captured stars, while everyone around me kept smiling, clapping, cheering, calling my name, saying how lucky I was, and I kept smiling too, holding his hand so tight as if letting go even for a second would make the entire illusion shatter into pieces. The ballroom smelled like white roses and expensive perfume and champagne and something else, something heavy, something that felt like expectation pressing against my chest, while my new husband Daniel kept whispering in my ear, telling me how beautiful I looked, how he could not believe I was finally his wife, and every time he said wife my heart skipped, but not in the way it should have, because beneath the lace of my dress and beneath the glow of the candles there was a strange trembling inside me that I refused to name. His best man Mark stood only a few feet away, laughing with the guests, lifting his glass, making toasts that made everyone roar with approval, and every time I glanced at him it felt accidental, but it never really was, because his eyes would meet mine for a fraction too long and then quickly look away, as if we both knew something that no one else in that glittering room could ever imagine. Mark had been part of our lives for years. He was Daniel's closest friend, almost like a brother. They played football together in college, started their first business idea together, traveled together, shared secrets together, and when Daniel told me months ago that Mark would be his best man, I felt something twist inside my stomach that I pushed away and blamed on wedding stress. The ceremony itself had been perfect, the vows emotional, the kiss long enough to make the crowd cheer, and when Daniel slipped the ring onto my finger I told myself, this is it, this is what forever feels like, this is stability, this is safety, this is the life everyone dreams of. And yet when we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, I caught Mark watching us, not with jealousy, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, something unreadable, something intense. At the reception, when Daniel was busy greeting distant relatives and posing for photographs, I found myself standing alone near the balcony doors, staring at the city lights below, feeling the cool air against my flushed skin, and that was when Mark stepped beside me without saying anything at first, just standing close enough for me to feel the heat of him through the thin fabric of my dress. "You look happy," he said softly, and his voice carried something deeper than the words themselves, and I turned to him, forcing a smile, saying, "Of course I am. This is the happiest day of my life." And he nodded slowly, as if he wanted to believe me but could see through the layers of makeup and glitter and forced excitement. For a second neither of us spoke, and the silence between us felt louder than the music inside the hall, and then he said, "I hope he never hurts you," and something about the way he said it made my breath hitch, because it sounded less like a blessing and more like a warning. I laughed it off, telling him Daniel would never hurt me, that we were perfect together, that this was meant to be, and Mark looked away toward the skyline, shaking his head slightly as if fighting with his own thoughts, before finally saying, "You deserve more than perfect, you deserve real." Those words followed me the entire night, echoing in my mind even as Daniel carried me into our hotel suite later, still laughing, still slightly drunk, still glowing from the applause of everyone who believed in our love story. And as he kissed my forehead, telling me he could not wait for our honeymoon in Bali, I smiled again, because that was what a new bride was supposed to do. But when I closed my eyes that night, lying beside my husband with the wedding dress folded carefully across a chair and the city lights still flickering through the curtains, it was not Daniel's face that appeared in my thoughts, it was Mark standing on that balcony, his voice low, his eyes searching mine as if he could see the cracks I had tried so desperately to hide. The next morning we left for the airport, surrounded by suitcases and congratulations and social media notifications exploding with comments about how we looked like a fairytale couple, and Daniel kept squeezing my hand, talking excitedly about beaches and cocktails and starting our life together, while I stared out of the car window watching the city blur past, wondering why instead of excitement I felt a growing storm inside me. At the airport, Mark showed up unexpectedly, saying he just wanted to see us off, and Daniel hugged him tightly, thanking him for everything, for planning the bachelor party, for giving that unforgettable speech, for always being there, and I stood slightly apart watching them, wondering why my heart raced when Mark's eyes found mine again. "Safe travels," he said to both of us, but the way he looked at me made it feel personal, and I swallowed hard, telling myself this was just nerves, just exhaustion, just the overwhelming change of becoming someone's wife overnight. On the plane, Daniel fell asleep almost instantly, his head resting against my shoulder, his wedding ring glinting under the cabin lights, and I stared at that ring, turning it slowly on my own finger, trying to convince myself that this circle of gold meant certainty, meant belonging, meant I had chosen the right future. Yet somewhere between takeoff and landing I felt the unsettling truth creeping in that marriage had not silenced the questions inside me, it had only amplified them, and as the plane carried us across oceans toward a honeymoon that was supposed to seal our happiness, I could not shake the feeling that something unexpected was waiting for us on the other side. When we finally landed, the tropical air hit my skin, warm and heavy and beautiful, and the resort looked like a postcard, with palm trees swaying and the ocean stretching endlessly blue, and Daniel laughed, lifting me in his arms, spinning me around, saying, "Welcome to paradise, Mrs. Carter," and I laughed too, because that was what the moment demanded. But as we checked in and walked toward our villa, I felt a strange premonition, like the calm before a storm, like the moment just before a wave crashes against the shore and changes the shape of the sand forever. I told myself this was just the beginning of our love story, that everything ahead would be sunshine and passion and perfect memories, yet deep inside a quiet voice whispered that sometimes paradise is where temptation grows strongest, and sometimes the person you never expected becomes the one who changes everything. And I had no idea that within days the line between loyalty and desire, between friendship and betrayal, would blur so dangerously that I would look back at this very moment wishing I had understood the warning hidden inside my own restless heart. The first 2 days in Bali felt like a dream painted in bright colors and soft sunlight, where Daniel kept holding my hand as we walked along the beach, talking about our future children, our future house, our future plans, and every sentence he spoke was filled with certainty, while every response I gave was wrapped in hesitation that I carefully disguised as shyness. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, waves crashing in a rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat, and I kept telling myself, this is peace, this is what love looks like after the wedding chaos fades. Yet even in that paradise I felt a distance growing between us, like an invisible wall neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Daniel was affectionate, attentive, proud to call me his wife. He would pull me close in front of strangers, introduce me with a wide smile, and say, "This is my beautiful bride," and I would smile back, but inside I felt like I was performing a role perfectly memorized, yet strangely disconnected from my own emotions. On the third evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, Daniel suggested we have dinner at the resort rooftop restaurant, and I agreed, adjusting my dress, staring at my reflection longer than necessary, wondering why I looked more nervous than excited. The restaurant was elegant, with soft music floating through the warm air, candles flickering between tables, and couples whispering to each other as if the entire world outside that terrace did not exist. And for a moment I allowed myself to relax, believing maybe the storm inside me had been nothing more than imagination. But then I heard a familiar laugh behind me, a voice I could recognize even in a crowded stadium, and my entire body stiffened before I even turned around. Mark was standing near the entrance, wearing a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled slightly, eyes scanning the terrace until they landed on me, and in that instant everything else faded into background noise. Daniel noticed my reaction before he noticed Mark himself, and when he turned, his face lit up with surprise and excitement as he stood quickly pulling Mark into a hug, asking what on earth he was doing here. "Surprise," he said, laughing, explaining that he had decided last minute to take a solo vacation, and since Bali was on his list he thought why not, and Daniel seemed thrilled, calling it fate, calling it destiny, calling it the best honeymoon bonus ever, while I stood frozen, trying to steady my breathing. Mark looked at me only briefly, but in that brief glance there was tension, confusion, something unspoken, and when Daniel insisted he join us for dinner I felt my pulse race in a way that had nothing to do with tropical heat. We sat together, sharing food, sharing stories, sharing laughter, and to anyone watching it would have looked like three close friends celebrating love under the stars, yet beneath the surface currents were shifting dangerously. Daniel drank more than usual, his excitement growing louder as the night deepened, and he kept reminiscing about old college memories with Mark, leaving me slightly outside their circle of nostalgia, and for the first time since the wedding I felt invisible. Mark noticed, he always noticed, and when Daniel excused himself to take a phone call I felt the air between us change, instantly heavier, charged. "I did not expect to see you here," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady, and he leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me, saying, "I did not plan this, but maybe some things are not meant to be planned." "I should be happy," I said almost to myself, and he nodded slowly, replying, "You should be, but are you?" That question lingered in the silence between us, and I wanted to lie to protect everyone, including myself, but the truth pressed against my throat, refusing to stay hidden. Before I could answer, Daniel returned, cheerful, unaware, and the moment dissolved into forced normalcy, yet something had shifted irreversibly. Over the next 2 days we kept running into Mark at the beach, at the pool, at the bar, and every encounter felt less accidental and more inevitable, as if the island itself was conspiring to test the boundaries of loyalty and desire. Daniel suggested we all go snorkeling together, and I agreed, pretending enthusiasm while internally battling guilt for emotions I had not yet acted upon but could no longer deny. In the water beneath the bright surface, where sunlight danced above us and fish moved in silent harmony, I felt strangely free, weightless, detached from the expectations tied to my new title as wife, and when I surfaced, removing my mask, the first person I saw was Mark, watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Later that afternoon Daniel decided to return to the villa early, complaining of a headache from too much sun and too many drinks, and he insisted I stay behind to enjoy the sunset, telling me he trusted me completely, because what could possibly go wrong in paradise? What could possibly go wrong echoed in my mind as I stood alone on the beach watching the sky darken, and then I heard footsteps in the sand behind me, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Mark stopped a few feet away, neither too close nor too distant, and for a long moment neither of us spoke because words suddenly felt dangerous, fragile, capable of triggering something unstoppable. "You love him," he said finally, and I nodded because that was true in a way that love can be true even when it is incomplete. "But you are not in love with him," he continued, and my silence became confirmation. "I do not know what I am feeling," I admitted, my voice barely louder than the waves, and he stepped closer, not touching me yet close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "This is wrong," I whispered, more to convince myself than him, and he nodded, agreeing yet not moving away. The sky turned darker, the first stars appearing above us, and in that dim light the world felt smaller, more intimate, like we were the only two people left awake on the island. "I should go back," I said, yet my feet refused to move, and he looked at me with an honesty that both terrified and drew me in, saying, "If you walk away now, maybe everything stays simple, maybe nothing changes." "And if I do not?" I asked, barely breathing. "Then everything changes," he replied. In that suspended moment I felt the weight of my ring against my finger, the memory of vows still fresh, the image of Daniel sleeping peacefully unaware, and I also felt the undeniable pull toward the man standing in front of me who seemed to understand parts of me my husband never noticed. The distance between us closed slowly, almost unconsciously, like gravity pulling two bodies together, and when his hand finally brushed mine, it was not dramatic, not rushed, just a simple contact that sent a shock through my entire being. I knew the line we were crossing even before our foreheads touched, even before our breaths mingled, even before the first kiss happened, soft, hesitant, questioning, and yet once it did there was no confusion left about what we were doing. The world did not explode, the sky did not fall, the ocean kept moving as if nothing extraordinary was happening, and that ordinary continuation made the betrayal feel even more surreal. One kiss turned into another, deeper, less hesitant, and in that stolen moment on the darkened beach I felt a rush of emotion, powerful, reckless, intoxicating, as if I had been holding my breath for months and was finally allowed to inhale. Every rational thought screamed at me to stop, to remember the promises, the ceremony, the man waiting back at the villa, but desire drowned out reason, and the truth was I did not stop. By the time I returned to the villa hours later, my hair smelled of salt and my lips still tingled, and Daniel was asleep exactly as I had left him, peaceful, trusting, unaware. I stood there in the darkness staring at him, feeling guilt crash over me heavier than any wave, and I realized the honeymoon had already transformed into something no photograph would ever capture. Paradise had not strengthened my marriage, it had exposed its cracks, and as I slipped quietly into bed beside my husband I understood that what happened on that beach was not a mistake born of alcohol or impulse, it was the beginning of a secret that would either destroy everything or force me to confront truths I had avoided for far too long. And the most terrifying part was not that I had betrayed him, but that a part of me did not regret it. I did not sleep that night because every time I closed my eyes I saw two different futures colliding in my mind, one where I confessed everything and watched my marriage crumble before it had even begun, and another where I buried the truth so deep inside me that it slowly poisoned every smile, every touch, every "I love you" that left my lips. Daniel stirred beside me just before sunrise, pulling me closer in his sleep, whispering "my wife" as if the word itself was sacred, and the weight of it pressed against my chest so heavily that I felt like I could barely breathe. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of waves, and in that fragile early light I studied his face, the man who had trusted me completely, the man who believed our honeymoon was unfolding exactly as planned, and I realized betrayal does not always arrive with chaos, sometimes it moves silently, slipping into the space between two heartbeats. When he woke up he smiled instantly, reaching for me, kissing my forehead, asking if I slept well, and I forced a nod because the truth felt impossible to form into words, and he began talking about booking a private boat tour for the afternoon, completely unaware that the storm had already reached our shore. I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the door, leaning against it as guilt washed over me stronger than the ocean outside, and I stared at my reflection, seeing not a glowing bride but someone divided, someone standing at the edge of a decision that would define everything. My phone vibrated softly on the counter, and even before I looked I knew who it was, because some connections do not need names to be recognized. "Are you okay?" the message read, simple, direct, dangerous. For several seconds I just stared at the screen, knowing that every reply would tighten the knot already forming around my marriage, and yet my fingers moved anyway, typing "I do not know." He responded almost instantly, "Neither do I." There was no dramatic confession, no poetic declaration, just two people acknowledging that what happened was real and unfinished. Daniel knocked gently on the door, asking if I was all right, and I quickly locked my phone away, forcing brightness into my voice, telling him I would be out in a minute, and in that small lie I felt the fracture widen. We spent the afternoon on the boat, the water sparkling beneath the sun, Daniel wrapping his arm around me, pointing at distant islands, speaking about returning here on our anniversary someday, and I nodded, smiling, taking photographs, capturing moments that looked perfect from the outside. But perfection is fragile, and by evening everything shattered. As we returned to the resort, I saw Mark standing near the dock, his expression tense, conflicted, and Daniel waved enthusiastically, calling out to him, suggesting we all have drinks together one last night before he supposedly left the island. One last night, the words echoed ominously in my mind. At the bar, Daniel ordered rounds, laughing louder than usual, reminiscing again about old memories, and at one point he excused himself to take a call from his mother, leaving Mark and me alone beneath the dim golden lights. "We cannot keep pretending nothing happened," he said quietly, and I swallowed hard, nodding because the truth had grown too large to ignore. "It was a mistake," I whispered, even though my voice lacked conviction, and he looked at me, searching my face as if trying to understand whether I was lying to him or to myself. "If it was just a mistake, you would not look at me the way you do," he replied. Before I could respond, Daniel returned unexpectedly, sooner than either of us anticipated, and he stopped mid-step, his eyes shifting between us, sensing the tension thick in the air. "What is going on?" he asked. Casually at first, but there was an edge beneath his tone. "Nothing," I said too quickly, and that single rushed word betrayed more than silence ever could. Daniel's smile faded slightly as he studied us both, and I felt my heart pound violently, because some truths have a way of surfacing even when no one speaks them aloud. Later that night, back at the villa, Daniel's mood had shifted, subtly quieter, more observant, and as I removed my earrings, placing them carefully on the dresser, he spoke without looking at me. "Did something happen while I was asleep yesterday?" The question sliced through the fragile calm, and for a moment I considered lying again, protecting the image of us, protecting the celebration everyone believed in, but I realized that every lie would only delay the inevitable. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes, and in that gaze I saw love, trust, fear all colliding, and my voice trembled as I said yes. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream, and Daniel stood frozen as if the word had physically struck him. "With him?" he asked, already knowing the answer, and I nodded, because denying it would have been another cruelty. His reaction was not explosive, not violent, not dramatic. Instead, it was quiet devastation, the kind that settles deep inside a person, changing them forever, and he sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the floor as if trying to piece together how the happiest week of his life had unraveled so completely. "Why?" he whispered, and I searched for a reason that would make sense, that would justify the unjustifiable, but the truth was messy, complex, painful. "Because I have been doubting us for months, and I was too afraid to admit it, because I thought marriage would fix what I did not understand, because when I am with him I feel something I never learned how to explain." Each confession felt like tearing fabric that could never be sewn back seamlessly. Daniel looked up at me, tears filling his eyes, and in that moment I realized betrayal does not only break promises, it breaks identity. It forces someone to question their worth, their judgment, their entire understanding of love. "I trusted you," he said simply, and those three words carried more pain than any accusation. "I know," I replied, and the guilt was unbearable. He stood then, pacing the room, running his hands through his hair, struggling between anger and heartbreak, and finally he said, "I need air." He left the villa without another word, and I stood alone, listening to the door close, knowing that the sound marked the end of something we had barely begun. Minutes later my phone vibrated again, and this time I did not hesitate before answering. "He knows," I typed, and the response came slower this time. "I am sorry." Sorry felt insignificant compared to the damage done. Hours passed before Daniel returned, and when he did, his eyes were different, not filled with rage but with clarity. "I cannot compete with something you feel deeply," he said quietly, "and I will not beg for love." The maturity in his pain broke something inside me, because I had expected shouting, accusations, chaos, but instead he offered honesty. "We rushed into this," he continued, "maybe because everyone expected it, maybe because we thought history was enough, but love cannot survive on expectations alone." By dawn we had made a decision, not dramatic, not fueled by hatred, but by painful acceptance. We would not continue pretending. The honeymoon ended early, not with photographs of sunsets but with separate suitcases and silent flights home, and when friends asked how paradise was, we both offered polite, vague answers, because sometimes the truth is too heavy for casual conversation. Mark and I did not run away together in some cinematic ending, because reality is rarely that simple. Instead, we faced the consequences, the judgment, the whispers, the fractured friendships, and slowly, carefully, we explored what existed between us without the secrecy that had once intensified it. Some relationships are born from betrayal and carry its scars forever, and others collapse under the weight of how they began, and I will not pretend that everything became magically perfect, because it did not. What I learned, though, was that commitment without certainty is a fragile foundation, and that ignoring doubts does not erase them, it only delays their eruption. I hurt someone who loved me deeply, and that truth will always follow me, but I also discovered that honesty, even when it arrives too late, is the only path forward. Sometimes the most shocking stories are not about passion or scandal, but about realizing that the life everyone applauds might not be the life your heart truly wants. And as painful as it was to watch my wedding dissolve into a lesson, I could not ignore the quiet relief that came from finally facing myself without pretending. Because in the end the real betrayal would have been staying in a marriage built on silence while my heart belonged somewhere else.